Welcome to First. I'm Mark Eichman, along with Shirley Min and Michelle Polston. Farmland is being lost to saltwater spray caused by big storms and rising sea levels. Researchers are experimenting with new crops. A look at some of the results this week.
As the economy improves, more people may look into buying homes. There's a program that tries to make that experience easier.
And education on breastfeeding is the goal of state health officials who want new mothers to know there is support out there in caring for your newborn. First, your public media news magazine starts now.
Delaware's coastline is slowly being eaten away every time there's a major storm and through the effects of sea level rise. Farmland that once raised a variety of crops is now ruined because it gets covered by saltwater spray. In our first look, Carolyn Beeler of WHYY's The Pulse reports from Milford on a possible solution and maybe a crop for Delaware's agricultural future.
Frank Webb's farm is just inland from the Delaware Bay. Saltwater flooding here has rendered vast swaths of formerly fertile land in the middle of his soybean fields barren.
You can actually see here the salt actually burning the plant, the sodium concentrations to the point it's burning the leaves. And once we get up here where salt water has not been, you can see the difference.
Frank Webb's family has been farming corn, soybeans, wheat, and barley for 5 generations. For as long as he can remember, there's been occasional saltwater flooding here. But with sea levels rising, it's getting more and more frequent.
This ground will flood probably 15 times a year, where 50 years ago, it may have flooded once every 5 years.
That means there's no time for rain to wash away the salt on the ground. Webb estimates about 100 of his family's 1,000 tillable acres have been ruined by increased flooding due to sea level rise. In a low-lying state like Delaware, rising seas are the top problem posed by climate change.
Up to 11% of the state of Delaware could be vulnerable to being permanently flooded by sea level rise. That is a very significant percentage of our total land mass, and we're already a very small state, so of course we're very concerned about that.
A 2012 report found that 2 to 4% of Delaware's highly productive soils could be underwater by the year 2100. More acreage could be impacted by saltwater flooding. At a University of Delaware greenhouse in Lewis, Emeritus Professor Jack Gallagher is researching the seashore mallow as a possible replacement crop for corn and soybeans. The seashore mallow is a relative of cotton and okra. It evolved in marshlands and can grow in high salt conditions.
We thought this could be a way of trying to maintain the yields of something and make the land still productive even though it has become salty.
Gallagher and his team have tried to come up with commercial uses for every part of the seashore mallow. They pressed the seeds into oil for biofuel and meal for feed. The stem has multiple uses. The softer inside he's chopped up and used for cat litter.
This is the whole stem chopped up. This is a mixture of the bark and the center part of it. And this is what we chopped up and used for the chicken bedding.
Gallagher has outdoor plots of seashore mallow planted a few miles away. One local farmer has been growing it for about a decade, and 2 outside the state have signed on to plant it for next year. But Gallagher says overall it's been difficult convincing farmers to plant the seashore mallow.
The challenges have been, we get the question if you go to the farmer and say, you want to plant some seashore mallow? And the obvious question is, well, what am I going to do with it? Who's going to buy it? And they said, well, we can make all these different things from it. And they said, well, who's going to buy it?
And companies don't want to start buying the seashore mallow to use as part of their cat litter or chicken bedding until there's a reliable group of growers. State officials say low-lying farmland may eventually be underwater, and it could be sold for wetland conservation. That's an option Frank Webb says he's open to.
Come back here in 3 or 4 years, and this may be just the most beautiful impoundment, water, ducks and geese everywhere is, you know, don't try to fix it if there's no way to fix it.
Frank Webb wants to give his farm to his daughters when he retires. He's encouraging his grandkids to work in other fields. Carolyn reports Jack Gallagher has had some interest from farmers wanting to plant seashore mallow. You can listen for Carolyn Beeler on The Pulse, heard Fridays at 9 a.m. and Sunday at 10 a.m. on WHYY-FM 90.9.
Coming up on First, health officials still look for ways to get out the message about breastfeeding for newborn infants. And the story of Delaware is the story of the DuPont family. A first history lesson is just ahead.
New numbers on the economy are out this week. As the trends continue upwards for the overall economy, the state of home ownership continues below pre-recession numbers. But people are buying homes, and first-time buyers need help. There's a Delaware program aimed at getting through the maze of paperwork they sometimes face. The road to recovery for the economy is getting houses like these sold. Delaware Community Reinvestment Action Council, also known as DCRAC, recognizes that with one of its newly formed housing clinics that offers pre-purchase counseling for residents. Meet Rachel and Joseph Howell. The couple is currently going through counseling to purchase their second home.
Sometimes you find yourself, you have a certain level of education of how to go about getting a loan or buying a house or whatever, but there's some things that you're not aware of, the small print or things that changes in law, policies, or things like that DCRAC makes you aware of.
These sessions are important to the Howells after their last home went into short sale. The couple was ahead on their mortgage until their two-income household turned into just one. To make matters worse, loan modification from their mortgage company didn't pan out either for the couple, who went from home ownership to renting.
Generally, our clients often come very distraught. So sometimes it's an issue of communication where they just haven't understood what's going on for so long, or it's a situation where they're trying to get help from whether it's the IRS or their bank, and they can't talk to someone who will just help them and give them an answer. They get the runaround. They are getting more information that just doesn't help. They feel worse about the situation.
Jacqueline Quinn, a resource director here at DCRAC, often hears all kinds of stories from local families. In August alone, more than a dozen families signed up for pre-purchasing. But no matter how many people look to DCRAC's housing clinics for assistance, grant money such as $50,000 from the Bank of America Charitable Foundation allows the organization to grow.
The $50,000 grant is huge for us at DCRAC. First, most of our federal funds require a non-federal match. So using that $50,000, we're able to leverage it and get a lot of federal funding to also assist with our programs. So the Bank of America grant is invaluable to us.
To date, traffic has been steady at DCRAC, with people searching for help. Just this year, at least 40 foreclosure prevention clients have sought out the organization, with 12 able to obtain permanent loan modifications, nearly 20 applying for assistance, and only a few successfully getting repayment plans. But as far as pre-purchasing counseling, the Howells are certain this housing clinic will work for them.
Just to be more aware of what our spending is and where we are, that we can prepare ourselves in our savings and things like that, so we can prepare ourselves to buy the home and to make sure that we can afford it with all the other expenses that come even after you get into the home.
Basically, information already being covered in their sessions.
So the pre-purchase counseling starts with credit, budgeting, saving for a home, and that's useful for those who are looking to buy a home in the future or even right now.
The program is just another way for DCRAC to address the housing crisis that continues across the country. According to officials, housing counseling has proved to be a lifeline for those wanting to keep their homes. Unfortunately, the foreclosure problem is still very strong in Delaware, which has even prompted additional days for mortgage mediation.
So that right there tells us that there are more people than expected going to mediation. And as far as pre-purchase goes, having that pre-purchase education hopefully will prevent this situation happening again in 10 years.
Meanwhile, Rachel and Joseph Howell are planning to take everything they learn to others in the community.
We don't want anyone to go through what we went through. So, you know, now with this direction that we're heading in now, we feel comfortable that we are taking solid steps to getting to the lifestyle that we want to be in and be able to afford it. And DCRAC is helping us to get there.
DCRAC's goal is to help educate people as they enter home ownership. Lack of knowledge was a big reason many went into foreclosure during the 2008 housing collapse. There are new seminars taking place all the time. The majority of them are on Saturdays. Go to dcrac.org to learn more.
A recent study estimates if babies born in the U.S. over 1 year were breastfed as recommended, the country could save $12 billion in health care costs alone. Despite the proven health benefits, though, Delaware's breastfeeding numbers continue to dip. These new moms are gathered together for one reason: to work on their breastfeeding relationships with their babies.
In the very beginning, my daughter was not able to latch onto the breast, so she wasn't able to get the milk flowing.
Mom Stephanie Powers says for the first few days of little Tallulah's life, she just cried and cried at the breast.
You feel like you're being a bad mom because you're not able to feed your child. Or that something in you is broken.
Powers sought help from lactation consultant Katie Madden here at the birth center in Wilmington. Madden, who's helped more than 500 women nurse their babies successfully, leads the breastfeeding support group every Friday afternoon.
So when you're pregnant, you're thinking, yeah, breastfeeding is the right thing. But when you're faced with, my baby's losing too much weight and I need to give some formula, my baby's not taking the breast, do I introduce a bottle? To be in that moment and have to make that decision is psychologically very difficult.
That stress could be one contributing factor behind Delaware's declining breastfeeding numbers. Compiled by the CDC, the state's most recent breastfeeding report card shows dips across the board compared with 2012.
That 2013 report card is a reflection of 2010 data. In other words, that survey was completed in 2010. And a lot of the progress that we've made as a state in the initiatives we've been able to put in place have taken place since then.
Delaware Division of Public Health Director Dr. Carol Rattay says new numbers are due out soon. She suspects the data will positively reflect the state's efforts. Since 2010, Rattay says the number of low-income moms in the state's Women, Infants, and Children program now choosing to breastfeed has doubled.
African American women tend to be half as likely, for example, to breastfeed compared to white and Hispanic women. And low-income women tend to be a lot less likely to breastfeed compared to women who have a higher income. And so using the WIC program is a great way to reach some of those more vulnerable populations.
The majority of the state's hospitals are also well on their way to becoming what's called baby-friendly, meaning maternity practices in the hospital are supportive of breastfeeding. Christiana is one of just 89 hospitals nationwide to receive federal dollars towards earning the certification.
It's a very daunting task to become baby-friendly certified. We've trained over 450 staff. And being the largest birthing hospital in the tri-state area with 6,500 deliveries a year, we'll take any resources we can get.
Madden is less concerned about the statewide drop from 2012 to 2013 and more concerned about moms who start breastfeeding and quit months later.
You can get off to a great start and then you encounter going back to work. That's a huge hurdle. You get off to a great start and then we start solids and we have to integrate that. We have behavioral issues. So throughout the duration of breastfeeding, there's a psychological strain, and that's something that we're really not addressing and most people aren't aware of.
The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends breastfeeding for at least 12 months. To get there, Madden says support is key.
Breastfeeding is a really nice opportunity to learn at an early stage that This isn't going to be easy, but it's going to be totally worth it.
Unfortunately, the 2014 report card saw another drop in almost every breastfeeding category except for one. DPH nurse and Delaware Breastfeeding Coalition Chair Liesl Phelps is concerned about the decline 2 years in a row, but says DPH received additional grant money in 2013 to support breastfeeding efforts, in addition to the initiatives already in place. And she hopes that the CDC's 2015 breastfeeding report card reflects those efforts.
The DuPont Company has announced it's leaving its storied headquarters located just off Rodney Square in Wilmington. For more than 200 years, the DuPont family has been a part of Delaware, and Delaware has been a part of what makes up the DuPont family. DuPont's impact on the first state started with a bang, literally. The gunpowder mills along the banks of the Brandywine River started a company that's been instrumental in battling America's enemies and taming the nation's wilderness.
This, in both peacetime and war, has been a tremendously important firm for the nation as a whole. Clearly, during the War of 1812, the Civil War, the First World War, the Second World War, DuPont as a munitions firm was enormously important.
Since that time, the company has widely diversified into a variety of products, from nylon to Kevlar and beyond.
Large employer, of course, source of technology and research. And then, of course, as the 20th century unfolds, particularly after the First World War, as DuPont increasingly focused on chemicals, and now, of course, has evolved beyond that into various biotechnology bits of research, that it's been important, as I say, both in a wide variety of employment venues, as well as from the corporate offices downtown in Wilmington to the world's first nylon plant in Seaford to powder manufacturing facilities before that. It really has played an enormous role.
As the company's Delaware-centric focus has shifted globally, its influence here has also declined.
Its impact is still large. And although Wilmington is no longer the company town of DuPont, the state of Delaware is no longer. I mean, there were times when Delaware's political representatives in Washington were referred to as the senator from DuPont.
As the company's influence has shifted, so has the family's.
My grandfather was the last family member to be president of the company, but he died in the early 80s.
Former State Senator Charlie Copeland now heads the Delaware Republican Party. He's one of more than 3,000 living descendants of Pierre S. DuPont. The family's philanthropic role in the state goes way back, from T. Coleman DuPont funding the construction of Route 13, DuPont Highway, linking the state from north to south, to P.S. DuPont paying for the construction of 89 schools for African American students throughout the state. The family's cultural legacy still stands.
Hagley, Winterthur, Longwood Gardens, these world-class institutions that are really a legacy of the DuPont family's largesse. And so I can't think of a single family that's impacted a single state in quite the same way.
Like many DuPont family members these days, Copeland may not have a DuPont last name, but a desire to continue that legacy remains.
As I tell my kids, it's great to be proud of your heritage, but ultimately you're judged on what you do, not what somebody who died before you did.
As the generational shifts continue, many will continue to track that impact on Delaware nonprofits and arts groups. And of course, with a family of thousands of descendants, there are bound to be some bad apples. At the movies late last year, Steve Carell's Foxcatcher focused on the murder of Olympic wrestler Dave Schultz by John DuPont. Foxcatcher did receive 5 Oscar nominations, but no awards.
We've gone through one of the coldest Februaries in a decade. These photos of the Cape May Lewis ferry were taken on the days when the ferry could get through the ice, but it was shut down for several days at the end of February. We took a look last year at the challenges faced on those ice-covered crossings. For most people, when they think about riding the Cape May Lewis ferry, they think about bright sunshine, the ferry leaving the Lewis terminal, and waving to those left behind on the dock. But this is what those docks are like now. High winds and bitter cold have made the winter of 2014 one to remember.
Winds up to 45, 50 miles an hour. Temperatures in a minus 10, minus 15 degrees with the wind chill. Yeah, brutal.
Everything seems harder. The line used to dock the ferry can freeze when you have high winds blowing water on workers as they do their jobs. Ferry workers and the captain need to know how to use the wind to their advantage.
The wind's blowing from the west right now, so he's coming in dock number 1. If it was blowing from the east, he'd be coming around on that side, so the wind will help push him closer to the dock.
On this day, it was a relatively smooth trip across. But as you get close to Cape May, the first thing you notice is the ice.
When it's frigid and we have some strong northwest or westerly winds, that ice gets packed into the canal and has nowhere to go, and then it starts to get thick. The thickest I've ever seen it in here is probably 12 to 14 inches.
1989, we left Cape May at 6 o'clock at night, and then we left. As we were leaving, we could see the ice building.
That night, the ice froze the canal. 28 people trapped on the ferry for 5 hours because the ship couldn't dock. Not only the navigation of the boat that's impacted, but the cold and ice take a toll on the ferry engines as well.
Our maintenance department right now is stressed to the max. The water pipes will freeze down on the car deck. If there's no water to the vessel various services, then we have to switch out vessels and stop the runs.
The ferry captains will say, as bad as that sounds, fog is worse. But even a bad day at sea in the summer just doesn't seem as bad as a cold day in winter. Nobody wants to sit outside. The Cape Henlopen was our ship this day in our journey, and for good reason.
Is this your normal cold weather ship then?
Yes, it is. When we had her built, we had a reinforced bow put on so that we could go through the ice. And the props were made of Monel, so that it was a combination, bronze Monel. But that was so that they would withstand the ice.
The key to running the ferry on days like this is that business operates as normal. 2 huge tractor trailers filled with clamshells came on board, headed back to Shelby Trucking in Selbyville. Leave it to trucker Dan Banks to put it all in perspective.
And what's it like taking the ferry in cold weather like this?
I love it. I love water, I love boats, and I said, I'm coming across there, you know. And it gives you a little break from driving, sit back and relax.
The Cape May side traditionally freezes over before the Lewis side. This winter has kept the Coast Guard busy trying to keep the Delaware River open for shipping, and the same for the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal. Well, let's just say we cannot wait for spring.
Before lighters, people used matches to light cigarettes and pipes. During the mid-19th century, the cases used to carry your matches became little pieces of art, some made by the likes of Fabergé and Cartier. First Experience is at the Delaware Art Museum to see a unique exhibit showcasing a small, and we mean small, slice of history as we introduce you to the match safe.
Well, there are approximately 400 match safes in the exhibit. We gather them from collectors all over the United States. There are collectors all over the world, but we just limited it to collectors in the United States. And then we chose those pieces that we thought would be best for the public to see. In 1826, a chemist in England devised the first friction match. But the problem was if they carried it loosely in their purse or their pocket or something like that, it could dangerously ignite. Eventually, people began to make their own protective cases. What happened, as many things in the Victorian era did, they became enormously decorative. And in various places and in various cultures, they used whatever motifs and designs and cultural things that were important to them to be put on the match safes. So in here you have a variety of match safes from all over the western and parts of the eastern world. Probably the ones that most people would be really interested in are the ones by really well-known makers like Fabergé and Tiffany. You have pieces that were figural pieces that were made in Germany and Austria, some in England made out of porcelain, bronze, iron, some silver. So you have a huge variety. In Japan, for example, they had unique metalworking technique. They also had 24 varieties of applying enamel to metal. Nobody else came close. Everything in match safes represents what happened from the period of about 1830 to about 1920, once the lighter became ubiquitous, and the Zippo lighter pretty much killed match safes. Most people don't know what match safes are because they're not in use at this particular time. But on the other hand, I would say you probably don't know what button hooks are because you don't use them very much now. And yet there are people who collect button hooks and nutmeg graters and corkscrews and so on. If you look closely at all of these objects, they are small masterpieces of art. And it's the same thing that you learn if you go to the museum. Once you begin to study the painting and understand what went into it and why this portrait is better than that portrait, it's the same sort of thing that happens here. It becomes an enormous learning experience that just grows and grows and grows.
There are over 300 match safes in the exhibit, which runs through March 15th. Go to delart.org for more information. If you're interested in learning more about match safes, you can find the International Match Safe Association on the web at matchsafe.org.
Next week on First, we look at some of the cutting-edge technology used by high school athletes to help them recover from knee injuries. And we all need some hope that spring is coming, and it will get here. We'll look next week at Delaware's birding flight patterns.
It doesn't seem like it, but we do love hearing the word spring. That is First for this week. We thank you for watching. For Carolyn Beeler, Nichelle Polston, and Mark Eichman, I'm Shirley Min. Have a great week.